Oh, can start recording. All right. So, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Maybe good morning to some of you. My name is Mia Mikic. I'm currently chair of the board of Friends of Multilateralism Group, and I'm greeting you today on behalf of our CEO, um, Lou, who is at the moment traveling. So the Friends of Multilateralism Group has this series of trade policy previews, and we regularly attempt to provide some sessions for the large trade WTO members. We have already had one session this year that featured Japan, and today we will be talking about the trade policy preview of India. These sessions are always well received by both um, the regular WTO delegates, but also experts in the field, because they are open and allow free discussions and tease out different issues that are always faced in these sessions on the trade policy reviews. So because we only have 1 hour for this session, we will be moving forward very quickly. I'm going to introduce our moderator for the session, Mr. Clemens Bonnekamp. He, of course, used to do trade policy reviews in the WTO for many years, but is also well known as a director of the agriculture uh, directorate there, and is now currently running this series of trade policy previews for the Friends of Multilateralism Group. So Clem will introduce the speakers and will moderate the session. Clem, mic is yours. You're muted, Clem.
Somebody mutes me. Is that Stella? Yeah. Thank you very much for your introduction, Mia. Wonderful introduction. And before I go, we hold these previews periodically for essentially the G20 countries so far, to give members a shot at looking at what may be coming down the line in the trade policy review, which happens very shortly after these previews. I have a thought in mind for the rest of the year. We have the United States and the EU having their trade policy reviews towards the end of the year, almost back to back. And I hope that we can arrange a sort of joint trade policy preview of the United States and the EU, and that will give the members a chance to compare and contrast, our FMG members plus audience, to compare and contrast US and EU trade policy. I hope we can arrange something of that sort. We have with us today Simon, who is going to use Simon Evenet, who uses his Global Trade Alert, of which he's the founder, to present us with the facts and an overview of the trade policy situation in India, and then on to Rajesh Agarwal, who as formerly ITC, but also as a former Indian diplomat, is going to give us his own overview of Indian trade policies. We're limited to an hour this time, so I'm anxious to hear the views of both people, as I'm sure you are. I'm not going to put a time limit constraint on them. They both are economic speakers, so I will give them free rein. Simon, please, I'm going to lead off with you. You have the floor.
Thanks, Clem, and I'll get straight into it. So we are discussing here the Indian TPR. Just some background information for you. India is a nation with a population of 1.48 billion people, making it a major populated Asian nation in terms of population. Its GDP is $4.15 trillion, which and it's rising fast at around 6.5%, according to the IMF. At this time, however, Indian GDP per head is about $2,800 So on average, this is still a relatively low income country. When you correct for differences in the cost of living, according to the IMF, that number rises to around $18,000. But still, this is a country which is large and still relatively poor. And that's going to be important contextual information for the information that I'm now going to share on the slides, which I will raise now. And I'm hoping that you can see the slides. Can you see the slides, Clem?
Yeah, I can see them, Simon.
Right.
Yes. And you
Good.
seem to be in control of them. Okay.
Good. So let's get cracking then. The last TPR of India took place in 2021. It was the seventh TPR of India. A number of matters were raised. I'll highlight a few of them from the chairman's summary. There were concerns about the level of Indian tariffs, the frequency of change of them, and the uncertainty associated with them. There was concerns raised about India's use of trade remedies and regulatory measures. Even back then, food security measures and agricultural support associated with it were a concern. India's industrial policies, especially those associated with the Make in India program, were quite nascent at that time. And now, of course, we can reflect on more on their implementation. But back then, the implementation of them was just beginning, and that was a source of concern. The government also had reformed its procurement policies and liberalized FDI. There was also some concern about India's participation at the WTO, with concerns raised about its engagement, at least in a constructive manner, on some of the key JSIs and associated initiatives. So that was the situation back in 2021. I raise it because I'm going to refer back to these observations to see what has changed and what has not. So let's turn to India's current trade policy, and beginning as always with tariffs. India has a tariff regime which has significant tariff water. The bound MFN rate is much higher than the applied rate, 48.5% compared to 15.8%, a huge gap. There is some duty-free tariffs or tariffs bound at zero, but these do not cover much in terms of agricultural and non-agricultural goods. So this is a regime which has progressively cut tariffs over time for much of the period since 1991, but with a little bit of regression since 2021. Turning to the number of tariff changes per year, actually the number here for India has declined over time, especially since the last TPR, and the average G20 member has implemented more tariff changes than India has. So this is one point of distinction from the last TPR, which we can point to. So it seems that the tariff regime is a little bit more stable now. In terms of the imports covered by measures which improve market access, they have been estimated here at the time of the last TPR and at the time of this TPR. And what we've done is to use granular 6-digit HS code data to estimate the share of imports which are covered by different types of market access improvements. And we can see that tariff cutting has, by 2021, had covered just under 50% of India's imports, and now that has risen to almost 65%. India uses a range of price and tax measures as well, which have expanded in scope in a way that has improved market access. And there's also been improvements, I think, in import monitoring and port measures, at least according to the Global Trade Alert database. So we do see improvements, at least in some product lines, covering quite significant shares of Indian imports. So this is the good news. This has to be balanced against the next slide, which shows you the measures which are in force now and compared to 2026. And we can see that compared to 2021, when the last TPR happened, we have an expansion of imports covered by tariff increases and by price and other tax measures. The biggest increase, however, though, comes in the expansion of imports in products where localization measures are at work. So this could be local sourcing, local hiring. These are the types of provisions which now cover about 40% of the goods that India imports. So that's probably the biggest change in terms of trade coverage, is on the localization measures side, and that may be something members want to ask India about. In terms of changes over time since the last TPR, we have on the right-hand side here the expansion of foreigners' exposure to Indian measures, and you can see that this has expanded considerably since 2021, reflecting a number of, especially a substantial run-up in 2022. This is, I think, associated with these localization measures that I discussed, as well as subsidies. And then, but it's also important to highlight that the share of Indian imports, which are covered by some type of liberalizing measure, has also risen to above 60%. Looking at India's stake in the trading system, which is the chart on the left-hand side, you can see that this India's exposure to foreign trade distortions and to foreign trade reforms has grown considerably too. So this is a period where Indian firms have found it much harder to export abroad, as well as benefiting from some reforms, and the opposite is true for foreigners trying to ship to India. So a period of a significant change since the last TPR. In terms of sectoral coverage, what stands out when you look at the breakdown of where which sectors have received support or are benefiting from trade barriers. If you look at the harmful measures, that is harmful from the perspective of foreign firms that are in force at the moment, 28% of them are in agri-food sectors, and 10% in machinery, electronics and communications, chemicals and metals each. So these are the big five sectors which account for some 68% of all of the trade distorting measures which are currently in force. And within agriculture, there's a heavy concentration of protection of vegetable oils, oilseeds, fruit and nuts, and cereals and grains. So we see quite heavy sectoral concentration of favoritism in the Indian commercial policy regime. Of the emphasis on agriculture, of course, comes through in a lot of the discussions with respect to Indian trade policy. And so we assembled a slide for this. We can see that the applied average agricultural tariff rate is around 36.7%, and the bound rate is 113%. Again, massive amounts of tariff water there. A lot of resort to export restrictions over time, and perhaps the biggest point to highlight, and I'll contrast it later with the discussion on subsidies for NAMA, the agricultural subsidies reached around 35 billion for minimum support prices in 2024, and on top of that is another 18 billion for fertilizer subsidies this year, and of income transfers for farmers of another 6 billion. These are all numbers from Indian government sources, not from, these are not numbers that we came up with. These are not our estimates. So when you put all this together, we are talking around $60 billion in agricultural support that we have found for India at this time. Just to round off on the discussion of classic trade policy, you heard me earlier refer to the number of anti-dumping actions taken by India, which was historically been higher than the G20. As this chart shows from 2021, this has remained the case, that essentially India's resort to trade remedies is far higher than the G20 average. So that has not changed since the last TPR. So this is my broad overview of the commercial policy changes. I now want to go into two separate discussions, one on industrial policy and one on digital policy. So let's turn to India's industrial policies, which, as I noted, had been, I think, rolled out or at least announced at the time of the last TPR and then now being implemented. I have two slides here. For the first is to discuss the frameworks and objectives that the Indians have for their industrial policy. They organize their industrial policies in different layers with a strategic umbrella, followed by measures which promote manufacturing, exports, and then certain particular sectors. The overall goal appears to be to increase the share of manufacturing and GDP to about 25%, and to generate around $2 trillion worth of exports by 2030. By 2030, these are the overall goals of Indian industrial policy. To pursue those goals, the government has put in place a number of tools, which are summarized on this slide here. Perhaps the one which gets a lot of the attention is the PLI schemes. These are production-linked incentives which the government issues, and these apply to 14 sectors of the Indian economy, which are spelled out. The spending on those sectors, though, has reached about $21 billion, which is much smaller than what you saw as the agricultural subsidy spending. And indeed, one of the things digging into this into Indian industrial policy is that they seem to have quite a lot of trouble getting money out the door. So the pots of money are created, but the actual disbursement seems to be much slower, and therefore one would expect the impact of industrial policy, whether good or bad, or trade distorting or trade as facilitating, would be correspondingly smaller as well. So there does appear to be a very active and ambitious industrial policy regime. I think the question is whether or not the private sector take-up for that scheme is there, and whether or not this is delivering the results that the Indian government wants. That might be a topic we could talk about later as well. The other deep dive I wanted to do was on the digital policies towards the digital economy. Here, India, of course, has played a quite important role here at the WTO on the JSI, on e-commerce, and the moratorium on customs duties. If you look into our digital policy alert database, there have been about 280 digital policy developments relating to the 11 areas of digital law that we track. 78 of them are in the area of digital governance, of data governance. So these would be the rules relating to the transfer of data, for example. 60 relate to design and testing standards, 59 to content moderation, and 41 to competition. So we can see here India has been quite active on trying to regulate its digital economy. I'll say a bit more about the trade-related aspects of this first. But since there's so much attention and interest in the customs duties moratorium, one of the things I wanted to share with you was a provision in the India-UAE CEPA in 2022, which was signed in 2022. There is an Article 915 which relates to customs duties. It's not exactly an agreement not to forswear imposing customs duties, but it does indeed sort of freeze the no customs duties policy stance of India, at least with respect to the UAE, for a period of time. And of course, you can see from the last clause here that they do allow for any update based on WTO decisions. So there is although India has taken a very tough line on these questions at the WTO, there does appear to be in its regional trading agreements at least one of them where it has taken a less hardball approach. So this might be an area worth discussing as well, what the logic of this was. With respect to the cross-border aspects of domestic regulatory developments, here I think there are points to make is that India has upgraded its data governance rules, but the new rules that they have on cross-border transfers of data are ones which are still being worked through, and they have significant requirements which could implicate foreign firms. The competition law, on the face of it, is neutral in terms of nationality of the corporate entities, but it seems to be being applied, at least in the digital domain, against the larger US companies. So again, there's a distinction between de facto and de jure treatment. There is no comprehensive AI law yet, but again, this is an area which is in progress. And on taxation, if anything, and to give credit to the Indians here, they have withdrawn a number of taxes and levies which affect non-residents. So it's a mixed bag in terms of the impact on foreign firms of India's domestic regulatory regime in the digital economy. But here, this is an ongoing area worth tracking. Let me wrap up by just putting some questions on the table which arise from this data. I think the first question is, given how much money that India puts on the table in agricultural policies, how effective has that been in terms of advancing food security objectives? And similar questions could be asked, of course, of their export measures that they put in place from time to time. Secondly, is there a mismatch between the objectives of Indian industrial policy, which seem to be very ambitious, and the outlays, which is the money that have been dispersed? And if so, what is the cause of that? Then another area which comes through looking at Indian industrial policy is how are they balancing the desire to attract foreign investment and to promote local participation in global value chains and local value added. This balance it's not clear where the balances are being struck here. The fourth question I would put on the table is, what is the nexus between digital domestic regulation and international commitments in this regard? And as I said, I noted there's a potential mismatch between one RTA provision and the position India has taken in Geneva on these matters. So especially in respect to the customs duty moratorium. And the last question, which is I think worth discussing, is in what ways has India's trade policy stance and its stance towards trade cooperation changing as the world engages or goes further into an era of geopolitical rivalry, and issues of reliability and trust and security of supply become as important as price and access to markets. So these are issues which we may want to pick up on in the discussion afterwards. I hand it back to you, Clem.
You're on mute, Clemens.
Who's doing this? I just assume I can talk anytime I like. I'm sorry. Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much. That's an invaluable slide deck. And thank you also for putting it in context. A bit more context, if I may. When I first became director of trade policy review in the WTO, and I think I did one of the first India TPRs, India's economy was about the size of Belgium. And then I met at that time, Mr. Singh, he was then Prime Minister, subsequently Prime Minister. And he told me that they were determined to walk away from the import substitution policies. The story since then has been remarkable. It is now what, Rajesh, the third largest economy? It's a remarkable progression, the fourth largest.
And the sixth times, depending on the value of dollar to rupee.
Oh, okay. But it has been a remarkable change in the Indian economic situation. And Simon, I think, has pointed to some of the reasons why. I presume that you, Rajesh, will take up some of the issues that Simon has actually raised. So I'm going to give it to you, Rajesh. Thank you.
No, thank you, Clemens. And thank you, Simon. I think my job has become easier in the sense that I can skip quite a lot of the stuff that I prepared, but I'll use some of that, to answer some of the questions as I see it now as an outsider. Am I audible, first of all? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. And you can see your my presentation as well?
No, I don't see your presentation. Stella, do you have it? You have it. Can you put it up?
No. Just let me.
I have it.
Now,
okay.
Can you see
now?
It now?
I can see the first slide.
Yeah. That's great. No, it's okay. See, obviously, Simon has already mentioned it. As I said, that I will try to give you India's evolving trade policy strategy, which is essentially driven by the FTAs, and in the process try to answer some of the questions which Simon has raised. Now, obviously, it is the fastest growing G20 economy, but let's leave it at that. Simon has already given these figures. I will only point out to this box that, the size of the economy is one thing, but one has to be mindful of the informal economy still accounts for about 45% of the GDP. 4 trillion, that means about 2 trillion economy is still in the informal economy, and the 90% of the Indian workforce is in the informal sector, 46% in agriculture, meaning thereby 65 billion people are in agriculture. Much of the subsidization which Simon Abnett in absolute figures is giving is actually to maintain above poverty line kind of provisions for that kind of population where productivity is low. And obviously in a democratic, competitive democracy like us, 65 billion people, 46% of the population, that's the reason. I'm not trying to get into whether it is good or bad. Then comes, obviously you can see the services 55%, manufacturing 17%. Here, the entire, Simon mentioned it about the industrial policy, etc. I still see, if you look at the manufacturing sectors, shares in China, obviously China is a 4.5 times bigger economy, but still 25%, South Korea 27%, even Malaysia and Vietnam are around that, 23, 24%. So the target which has been set from 17.5 to 25 actually is around that level. That's the logic in setting the target of 25% of the GDP. Coming to the services, here you will see that software, professional management, business services, they constitute 24% of the services GDP, and that's the growth engine. Otherwise, there are informal sector, all this, etc. In the broader sense, the 65% are other services, etc. But we are talking about those 24%, which is the dynamic sector of software, IT, professional management, business services. Manufacturing subsector, I want to bring it because it has relevance to what observation Simon has made. See, the medium and high-tech industries of electronics, pharma, chemicals, transport, electrical equipment, machinery, their share has grown to 46%. Domestic consumption is about 70-75%, and rest will be export percentage about 25 to 30%. Now, this is the sector, this group of sectors is the target for all these industrial policy schemes, and I will show you how it has gone. You can see that, the textiles and apparel, the labor-intensive part of the industry is hardly, their shares are low, although they are high providers of employment. Although their export intensity is in textiles and apparel still remains 35%, but that's what is going into the reasons for whatever the industrial policy measures are or the targets which are being mentioned by Simon. Now, if we look at the FDI flows, they had gone to 1 year of 80 billion also, but this is the latest 58 billion. They are in those high growth sectors, computers, services. I don't know about the cause and effect. Since they are high growth, that's why FDI also gets attracted, or the FDI is there, that's why they are growing more. I think the first one is more correct, that because they are growing, that's why FDI is also coming, because the next slide is that the foreign capital only constitutes 7% of the investment flows. Rest is private corporate, which is always debated that it is not picking up. That's one of the policy challenges India is facing today, of picking up their private capital. Government, in our parlance, it is quite high, and it is going into mainly infrastructure development. Households savings is 34% share in the overall capital formation. Now here I thought that I will compare it with China. See, Indian economy is domestic consumption-based economy. It is domestic consumption is about 60% of GDP. If I compare it with China, it is about only 40% of the GDP is consumption-based. Although if we see in share terms, not in absolute figures, exports share is the same, but obviously they're 4 times higher economy. A higher GDP of 4.5 times higher GDP leads to much more exports. But if I see in 2006, when Chinese economy was of the size of today's India's economy, their share in exports was about 35%. So these are the things. And today, the less domestic consumption, this slide shows it, the less domestic consumption in China is their household savings, which becomes the investable surplus. That's what they are, investing in productive capital, whether in infrastructure, whether in BRI or whether in manufacturing sector. Should I call it subsidies or whatever? This is the difference, main difference, which is there in the two economies. And I also tried to compare it when China's economy was of the same size as today's India's. Now, if we look at our trade situation is we are quite, we are on the negative side on the balance in the merchandise trade, and quite a lot. I'll go into some breakup also, but doing very well in the services. And in fact, much of the deficit on the merchandise trade is balanced by the services. This total negative balance actually, gets covered through remittances. Remittances are also of the order of 95. Sometimes it has 1 year, it has become 100 also. So more or less, with remittances and surplus generated on services, I think we can balance trade more or less with the deficit in the merchandise trade. Now, it is important, because of the kind of FTAs that we are going into, we are very surplus on merchandise trade with the United States. That is the reason that we are always in trouble with the current administration in the US. We are surplus with EU, United Kingdom, and then our neighbors. Whereas we are extremely deficient with China. Then rest of the people are only commodities because we are large importers of petroleum products. 90% of our petroleum demand, gas demand, is through imports. That is the reason this Russia, Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia figure in the first 5. Switzerland is because of gold. Otherwise, it is China actually, which is the issue for our negative merchandise trade. I don't know whether it is very different for others as well, but this is, I can give the figures for ourselves. Here, it's already mentioned that much of, if you see the total imports in merchandise are going up, because the total imports in any case are going up. The point to be seen is that the services imports are almost constant since 2022, whereas exports are increasing. And therefore, this gap or the surplus in the services is increasing, which is able to match the gap which is appearing in the merchandise trade. Here it is only better visual by reducing the number of lines in that respect. Now, coming to the Indian merchandise exports by sector, here also the industrial policy and others will figure in. And here the point to be made is that, as I said, these items of medium and high-tech industries, more medium tech industries, they constitute about 46% of the GDP. Even in the export share of these products has increased in the India's export basket. Whereas the traditional, labor-intensive products have gone down actually as a percentage of our export share. Petroleum products, because we have the refining capacity and therefore sometimes we import crude and also export the refined products. That is what it is. So let me now go to the next thing. Imports, I've already said that it is mainly, the electronic goods, engineering goods. Engineering goods is basically the capital goods import. Electronic goods is going, I'll explain later, quite a lot into the GVC manufacturing, GVC in participation. But otherwise, it is the petroleum which are the main imports for us in terms of value. Services, I've already mentioned, software, professional management, business services, they constitute 40% of our export share, and then professional management another 20%. So these are the high growth areas for India. Now, in this, I'd also like to mention that even our picture, I mean, this answers one of the questions which I'll try to answer on moratorium, is that, India's share in export of services actually is quite a lot, in the sense that it's about 4.3% of the world's services export. Again, depending on the value of rupee versus dollar, we are ranked 5th or 6th in the global commercial services exports, below only US, UK, Germany, and Ireland. Ireland is at 5%, US is about 13%, India is about 4.3%. The rest 4 are in the group between 4.2 to 4.4%. So in that sense, this is an important thing, and India does understand it. I mean, Simon, to answer your question, it is the domestic politics which doesn't allow it to come openly and say, oh, I'm for the permanent. But you haven't heard India, even at this ministerial, to say, I will block moratorium. Heart of hearts, they would have been happier if it had gone through. And that is the reason, the kind of language you have read out for the UAE agreement that is there. In EU and UK, this has not been put, for the simple reason there is one argument which is being given and which has some validity, that it is such an evolving technical area that they don't want to commit for a permanent moratorium, whereas they have no problem in going for moratorium on 5-year basis, etc. I mean, I'm saying, please don't quote me. I'm saying this is the thinking, by which they go and they behave. I mean, it is obvious. They don't block. They go for this kind of thing in the FTAs also, but they don't, shout from the rooftop that they are for permanency, in spite of the fact that the figures of their exports in mode 1 show that very clearly. Others is, on the imports, obviously it is transport travel, which is integration into global, routine stuff. Now, I want to, again, give some of these answers, or try to give answers to the questions. See, this black line is the India's overall GVC participation. You can see there are 2 jumps broadly in 2015 in 2 products, 2 subsectors, and in 2020 in 2 subsectors. This is what India is wanting to do. Look, it looks easy for us sitting abroad to say that GVC participation is the best thing for developing countries to do and to increase the export basket. Let me tell you, who has worked for Government of India as well as sitting abroad and even in ITC, using the same arguments as we do, changing the mindset of India, of many people in the political spectrum and even in the bureaucratic spectrum, that GVC participation is the way to go, not the domestic consumption route, which I said in the earlier presentation is quite high in India's case, is quite a change in the mindset. And it is evolving. At least now, I find that thinking is that this is the way to go. I'm not saying that this has been fully imbibed by everyone down the line, whosoever is giving regulatory, approvals and all that, but this is at least being recognized. And as I will come later on what has been achieved, it will show. Now, if you look at the revealed comparative advantage, I got this slide, based on 2020 figures of the World Trade Organization, WTO. You can see our traditional labor-intensive items, gems and jewelry, textiles, actually their RCA index is going down over the years. Whereas of the new areas of medium tech, I'll not put very high tech, but medium tech, even from a low base, it is on the increasing side. So this is where the industrial policy is coming into. And so the benefits in the manufacture of iPhones is quite visible. I think last year we exported maybe the assembled components, but 45 billion worth of iPhones were exported. So, to Simon's question, what I get from the public space in India is that that scheme has worked quite well in the electronics, especially in the iPhone sector, in that sense. Right, so this is what it is. And secondly, when I go to the next and I talk about the FTAs a bit, I think the strategy of going for FTAs with developed countries. I mean, incidentally, today is the day when we have implemented the UK FTA with UK. Today is the first day, launch. EU, perhaps next January, will do it. So the philosophy, I think, there is to have a more level playing field in these labor intensive areas where we don't get GSP benefits or the LDC benefits. So in the reciprocity, there will be a level playing field which may improve this RCA a bit here in this sector, and here with these sectors of pharma, engineering, electronic components, to link it with the FDI, pursuant to by reducing duties or eliminating duties as part of the FTAs on intermediate goods and products, and also regulatory alignments, etc., to try to attract investments, and coupled with the industrial policy to deal with these issues, because this is the strategy they have formulated to grow economically. So in a way, services, I need not repeat, already it is, services are strongest competitive engine, FDI is aligned with technology and services, and the next reform frontier is converting domestic scale into GVC participation. I mean, again, I'm repeating, to change the mindset of Indian, whosoever are the policy making, stakeholders, it's quite an effort, and it's quite a big thing that even if they have started recognizing. Okay, now everything trade policy is to be used, for this means developed, it's a political slogan, by 2047, meaning 100 years of India's independence, and they want it to become a 30 trillion economy. And the World Bank in 2025, last year, estimated that India will need to grow at real growth of 7.8% annually to achieve this. This translates, I think, into 10, 11% or 10.5% of the nominal growth. It's a political slogan. I don't know, let me be frank about it. Even Indians, reasonable Indians, would believe that we may attain in the next 2 decades level of about 22, and not 30. Maybe it will take another 5 years to attain 30. This is the kind of things which are going on in that. And here it is in this context that, the entire GVC integration is coming into limelight. And FTAs, not the WTO, it is the FTAs, and that too with the developed countries. It is our Commerce Minister has openly said that our markets, as I showed you earlier, are developed countries. So we will prioritize our FTAs with developed countries. They will be source of FDI, technology, etc. And this will improve our GVC participation. And this is the way we can only attain these objectives only through that. And this is coupled with the domestic reforms. I will touch on them a bit in the next slides. So obviously, UK, it has already come into effect today. With EU and with Japan, it is there. With United States, we keep on hearing that it is 99% done. I know it's always there's a problem on agriculture, whatever may be the thing, because it is, contested politics on both sides. And on their side, they must show that they have got benefits in agriculture. On our side, and if they make too much of noise about it, like on Truth Social platform, it becomes even more resistant for us to make those concessions, even if we like to make those concessions, frankly. And here I would say a little bit of political economy. There has been no noise, negative noise with EU and UK FTAs. In fact, today, if you read the newspapers, because of the first day of implementation of UK, there are only positive things coming up on the thing. With EU, no negative press I have seen since January, since it was kind of signed. But with the United States, even one Truth Social, 5 lines creates such a havoc in the political scenario in India about the resistance to it. Now, again, look, why the selection of these countries and why important? I don't think that I need to really labor on that, because our share of exports to the US markets is our depend 23% to EU 17%, whereas China is on the other side, it is importing. We are importing 17 or 18% of our imports are from China. On the other side, EU and US, India's share is not that much in their export basket or import basket, but it is growing. So that is why, obviously it's on this. But if you look at China, China is, India imports 3.6% of the export of China. So in that sense, China dominates India's import dependence, whereas US and EU dominate India's export markets, but India remains a modest but increasingly material market for US, EU. That's the logic from the Indian side for prioritizing FTAs with these countries, not with China, sorry, only with US, EU, and other developed countries. Now, look, the GVC gap. At present, we are around 40% GVC participation. This level, I think, increased to 45% in 2018, but today 40%. India's share in global GVC exports is only 1.7%, and our desire through this goal is to go to 55%. Now, again, this 55% figure is from the comparable level in 2006 of Chinese economy. Their share of GVC participation, was around 55%. That's the goal India has kept. Today, I think they are at the same level as 35-60, but that's a very big economy. But we are talking about the economy in 2000, Chinese economy in 2006 of the size of about 4 trillion. Now, the domestic reforms are also going side by side. This has been well recognized. And I will just show 3 slides to show investment facilitation. The national window, single window, forget about India is so resistant to investment facilitation agreement in WTO, etc. But they have all the measures they have taken to create even a national single window for this purpose. And all these figures are showing the approvals they are giving. The liberalization on FDI, I think Simon also mentioned. And it is the same kind of things coupled with the industrial policy, and these subsectors Simon have also mentioned, so I will not repeat those. Now, customs, logistics, there have been improvements. 2014, we were 54th in the LPI index of World Bank. We are today 38th, or in 23, destination top 25 in 2030. Similarly, import release time, there have been improvements from 87 hours to 79 hours in last 3-4 years. So all these improvements are there. Now, what is the next target? We have created the digital infrastructure for paperless trade. It's 100% under the UNESCAP, whatever their guidelines are or their system is. But the legal validity for interoperability remains weaker at 66%. And I'm sure that they are working on it, and the FTAs with these countries may also kind of try to accelerate or encourage them to move it faster. Now, this is, I'll skip that because Simon has dealt with this subject quite a lot on industrial policy. So in a way, to conclude, these reforms, it's a systems kind of reform, and the target is 2047, 100th year of India's independence. 30 trillion economy, political guideline, but GVC integration as a national objective at least has been recognized and work has started, coupled with deeper customs and logistics reforms, digital delivery to be used, and digital infrastructure to be used to deliver results. See, one area where we actually suffer is we have a bigger country, federal setup, states, the change of mindset at the provincial level is extremely difficult. So the new strategy, which we have kind of devised, is to make them compete against each other for attraction of FDI and all that, and even labor reforms and others. So that is the reason you see higher growth rate in states like Tamil Nadu, which has become, all the auto industry goes there, the software and all in Bangalore and other places, and, Gujarat. So in a way, the competitive nature of this is going on to create competition amongst the states so that they can move towards reform. Certification and testing, this is a major area where we want to work on, especially after signing these FTAs with developed countries. I mean, there's a recognition even today, if you see the newspapers, the first thing, if you want to actually work under these FTAs with developed countries, there's always improved certification, quality improvement, testing, infrastructure, and all that. And trigger for all that, we're using the FTAs with developed countries as an instrument to encourage, to accelerate this kind of a transition to the GVC-led growth model from the purely domestic-led growth model. I'll just end by saying challenges are enormous. It is not as simple as I may have made out to be in the presentation, because I said the change in mindset itself to go from domestic consumption model to a GVC participation model to whatever extent is quite an effort in the Indian setup. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rajesh. You've taken us close to the time limit. I was tempted to cut in, but I was fascinated by your presentation. Thank you very much. We do have time, a little bit of time for a few short questions, and the floor is open to anyone who wishes to ask. I don't see any hands up. Oh, there is. Sorry, Alan, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank both of our speakers for very informative and very useful presentations, both Simon and Rajesh gave. Quickly, Rajesh ended on the FTA kind of approach that India has embarked upon. For both of them, how important, for example, is the EU, the mother of all FTAs, supposedly, the EU India agreement? Does it touch upon the areas it has to? Does it go deep enough? Is it the model? I'll leave it there with that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. There are no other hands up at the moment. I'm dying to ask Rajesh a question, though, and that you pointed to the 46% poverty rate that still exists. That surely has...
Informal. No, not poverty. Informal.
Okay. No, but that has come down, has it not? And
yeah,
then
absolute poverty rate has definitely come down drastically, I would say.
And secondly, I've been told by some of your former ambassadors, actually, that poverty considerations drive Indian trade policy, drive India policy making. And that goes to the mindset that you spoke about. Is that still the defining element in policy making, or is there a change in mindset? And does that begin to explain India's position on agricultural subsidies and its position on public stockholding in the WTO? These are two questions. I'm going to give it to, we are virtually out of time, but I'm going to give it to Simon and then to Rajesh to wind us up on this, perhaps taking these two questions into account. Simon?
Let's give my time to Rajesh for these. I think he's much better placed.
Rajesh, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, okay. First, let me answer Alan's question.
Simon.
Yes, yes, definitely. it's quite a deep agreement. India has taken commitments even in CBAM. I mean, from that you can see even competition policy in that. It's quite a deep agreement. Although I must say that EU and both India has agreed to do this, and EU has also been accommodative. That, for example, in CBAM, I think the compromise, which was the last one to be arrived at, was that dispute settlement will not apply, but only the consultative mechanism will apply. So I'm just trying to say that accommodation has been made on both sides, but it is quite a comprehensive agreement. And if you see Madam Ursula von der Leyen, whenever she meets our Prime Minister, she says the unfinished story is we have to by December complete even the investment agreement in that. So this is a very major step which India has taken, and they are kind of even to, it's a template. I mean, the UK agreement is almost the same as EU agreement in a way. So that's there. See, Clemens, the thing is that obviously the layman, I mean, not the ambassadors are not laymen, but I'm saying in the general parlance, you can say that the poverty, but obviously the storehouse of poverty is only there, although it has been reduced. But if you are talking about poverty in the World Bank terms, etc., it has come down. That's why I'm saying it is an informal economy. So therefore, and it's a politics which is very competitive politics. You see that we went for 5 years ago for the reforms in the agricultural farm laws. The government almost fell. They had to withdraw. These things. So politics, you cannot divest yourself from politics, but it is not pure politics. It is just that, I mean, these absolute numbers, after all, we are talking about 65 billion people and such a huge agricultural kind of GDP, I mean, in absolute terms. So these figures, in terms of percentage, etc., will not be that much. And if you come to the per capita thing, it will not be that much. So I will say that you will not hear too much, given our political economy and the way of agriculture is, that this will change very much our positions. Although the government has tried to move, I mean, Simon showed those figures too, the income support from the subsidization, right? So again, there is a resistance to even move to the income support. They want the income support over and above the subsidization. Government is trying it, So it's a problem area. So I don't think, and that is why the agreement with EU was easier to take care of the sensitivities on this sector on both sides, whereas with US it is stuck because of that. So I'll only leave at that.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. We are in fact out of time. I want to thank both you and Simon a great deal for what I think are very valuable presentations. Mia, do you have a few closing words before I end up?
No, just go ahead, Clem. Thank you.
I'm allowed to close down.
Yep.
Thank you all very much for your participation, and in particular, Simon and Rajesh, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.